Sarah stared at the blank screen, her knuckles white against the steering wheel. The interstate stretched endlessly ahead, swallowed by darkness that seemed to press against her windshield like a living thing. She'd been driving for 6 hours straight, fleeing a life that had crumbled around her in the span of a single afternoon. "Just keep driving," she whispered to herself, the same mantra she'd been repeating since leaving Chicago. Just keep driving. The fuel gauge hovered dangerously close to empty. She hadn't seen a gas station in over an hour, and the last exit sign had been so faded she couldn't read it. The road seemed to stretch on forever, a ribbon of cracked asphalt cutting through an ocean of cornfields that rustled in the wind like whispered secrets. That's when she saw the headlights in her rearview mirror. They appeared suddenly, twin points of light that materialized out of the darkness behind her. Sarah felt a flutter of relief. Another driver meant civilization, meant she wasn't completely alone on this God-forsaken stretch of highway. But as the minutes ticked by, the headlights never got closer. They maintained the same distance, following her at exactly her speed. Sarah pressed the accelerator. The speedometer climbed to 70, then 80. The headlights matched her pace perfectly, never gaining, never falling behind. She eased off the gas, dropping to 55. The lights slowed with her, maintaining that same eerie distance. Her hands began to tremble. She'd heard stories about highway stalkers, predators who followed lone drivers until they found the perfect opportunity to strike. The thought made her stomach clench with fear. Mile marker 48 flashed past, then 49. The headlights remained constant in her mirror, like eyes watching her every move. Sarah's breathing quickened. She needed to get off this road, find somewhere safe, somewhere with people and lights and the illusion of safety. Then she saw it, a green exit sign emerging from the darkness ahead. "Rest area, 1 mile," it read. Sarah had never been so grateful to see those words. She could pull over, let the other driver pass, maybe even call for help if her phone had any signal out here. The rest area was a small patch of civilization carved out of the wilderness. A few picnic tables, a couple of vending machines, and a single street light that cast a weak pool of yellow light over the cracked parking lot. Sarah pulled into the space closest to the light and killed the engine. She sat in the darkness, watching the road through her side mirror. The headlights she'd been watching for the past hour should appear any moment now, should cruise past on the interstate and disappear into the night. She waited, counting her heartbeats in the silence. The headlights never came. Sarah twisted in her seat, looking back toward the highway. The road was empty, a dark ribbon stretching in both directions without a single point of light visible. It was as if the car behind her had simply vanished into thin air. "That's impossible," she muttered. But even as she spoke the words, she felt a chill creep up her spine. She'd been watching those lights for miles. There was nowhere they could have gone, no exit ramps or side roads she'd passed. Her phone showed no signal, just as she'd expected. The rest area felt abandoned, forgotten by time and civilization. The vending machines were old and rust-stained, their selection windows dark. One of the picnic tables had been overturned, its legs pointing toward the star-filled sky like the ribs of some ancient beast. Sarah's fuel gauge was nearly in the red zone now. She couldn't afford to sit here much longer. Not if she wanted to find a gas station before running out completely. But the thought of getting back on that dark highway, of facing whatever had been following her, made her stomach churn with dread. She was about to start the engine when she noticed something odd about the streetlight. The bulb was flickering, casting strange shadows that seemed to move independently of the wind. And there, at the very edge of the light's reach, she saw something that made her blood freeze. Tire tracks in the gravel, fresh ones, leading from the highway to a spot directly behind her car. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't heard another vehicle arrive. The rest area had been empty when she pulled in. She was sure of it. But the tracks were undeniable, pressed deep into the loose gravel as if made by something heavy. She fumbled for her keys, her hands shaking so badly she could barely fit them into the ignition. The engine turned over with a reluctant cough, and she threw the car into reverse without bothering to look behind her. The rear bumper hit something solid with a metallic crunch. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she shifted into drive and pulled forward, then turned to look back through the rear window. There, sitting in the space directly behind where she'd been parked, was a car. An old sedan, dark and battered, with a windshield so tinted she couldn't see inside. It hadn't been there when she'd pulled in. She was absolutely certain of that. But there it sat, as if it had been waiting for her all along. Sarah floored the accelerator, her tires spinning in the gravel as she raced toward the highway. In her rearview mirror, she saw the dark sedan's headlights flicker to life. They were the same twin points of light that had followed her for miles, the same eyes that had watched her every move. Back on the interstate, Sarah pushed her car to its limits. The speedometer climbed past 90, the engine whining in protest. Behind her, the headlights kept pace effortlessly, maintaining that same impossible distance. No matter how fast she drove, they never gained and never fell behind. Mile marker 50 flashed past, then 51. The fuel gauge needle was firmly in the red now, the low fuel warning light glowing like an angry eye on the dashboard. Sarah's vision blurred with tears of frustration and terror. She was going to run out of gas, and when she did, whatever was following her would finally catch up. That's when she saw the lights ahead. A truck stop materialized out of the darkness like a beacon of hope. Bright fluorescent lights illuminated rows of gas pumps, and Sarah could see the warm glow of a convenience store beyond. There were other vehicles parked under the lights, real people going about their normal lives, blissfully unaware of the nightmare unfolding on the dark highway. Sarah pulled up to the nearest pump, her hands shaking as she shut off the engine. She sat for a moment, gathering her courage, then glanced in the rearview mirror. The headlights were gone again, vanished as completely as they had at the rest area. The truck stop was busy despite the late hour. Long-haul truckers moved between their rigs and the store, and Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. She wasn't alone anymore. Whatever had been following her wouldn't dare approach with so many witnesses around. She filled her tank with trembling hands, constantly glancing over her shoulder. The highway remained empty. No sign of the dark sedan that had terrorized her for the past hour. Maybe it had been her imagination after all. Maybe the stress and exhaustion of the day had finally gotten to her, making her see things that weren't there. Inside the convenience store, the fluorescent lights were harsh and bright after the darkness of the road. Sarah bought a coffee and a candy bar, more for the comfort of normal human interaction than because she was hungry. The clerk, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, barely looked up from her magazine. "Rough night?" the woman asked, glancing at Sarah's pale face and shaking hands. "You could say that," Sarah replied, forcing a smile. "Have you seen any other cars come through here in the last few minutes? A dark sedan?" The clerk shook her head. "You're the first customer I've had in over an hour. Road's been pretty dead tonight." Sarah nodded, paying for her purchases. As she turned to leave, the clerk called out to her. "Hey, hon, you might want to be careful out there. We had a trucker come through earlier, said he saw something strange on the highway. Some kind of accident or something. But when he went back to check, there was nothing there. Just thought you should know." Sarah's blood ran cold. "What kind of accident?" "Car wreck," he said. "Dark sedan. Looked like it had been there for years. But like I said, when he went back, it was gone. Probably just his imagination, but..." The clerk shrugged. "Strange things happen on these old highways." Sarah stumbled out of the store, her mind reeling. The dark sedan, the one that had been following her, was it real? Or was she losing her mind, seeing phantom cars in her rearview mirror? She climbed back into her car, her hand still shaking as she started the engine. The highway stretched ahead, disappearing into the darkness beyond the truck stop's lights. Somewhere out there, mile marker 52 was waiting, and beyond that, 53, 54, and countless others stretching into the night. Sarah pulled onto the highway, her eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. For several minutes, the road behind her remained empty. Then, just as she was beginning to relax, she saw them again. The headlights. They appeared suddenly, as if materialized from the darkness itself. Twin points of light that matched her speed perfectly, never getting closer, never falling behind. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she realized the truth. She would never escape. Whatever was following her, whatever lurked in that dark sedan, it wasn't bound by the normal rules of the world. It existed in the spaces between mile markers, in the darkness that swallowed lonely highways, in the fear that gripped travelers' hearts when they found themselves alone on unfamiliar roads. Mile marker 55 flashed past, then 56. The headlights remained constant in her mirror, eternal and patient. Sarah understood now that this was her fate. To drive forever through the night with those lights behind her, never stopping, never resting, never escaping. She pressed the accelerator, and the speedometer climbed once more. Behind her, the headlights kept pace. And somewhere in the darkness, mile marker 57 waited to welcome her into the endless night. The last thing Sarah saw before the darkness claimed her completely was the fuel gauge needle sliding past empty, and in her rearview mirror, those twin points of light finally beginning to grow larger, rushing toward her with the inevitability of death itself. They found her car the next morning, wrapped around mile marker 58. The police report noted that there were no skid marks on the road, no evidence of another vehicle involved in the accident. The fuel tank was completely empty, though the nearest gas station was over 100 miles away. But truck drivers still report seeing something strange on that stretch of highway. A dark sedan with tinted windows, following lone travelers through the night. It appears suddenly in their mirrors, keeping perfect pace, no matter how fast they drive. And sometimes, on the darkest nights, they say you can still see Sarah's car, headlights cutting through the darkness as she drives forever between the mile markers, searching for an exit that will never come, pursued by something that should not exist in the waking world. This story was told to me by my Uncle Jake, a long-haul trucker who's been driving these highways for over 30 years. He swears every word is true, and after what I experienced last month, I believe him. The old man appeared in Jake's headlights like a ghost materializing from the storm. Rain hammered the windshield of the 18-wheeler as Jake downshifted, his air brakes hissing in the darkness. Highway 49 stretched endlessly through the pine forests of northern Montana, and Jake hadn't seen another soul for hours. The hitchhiker stood perfectly still on the shoulder, thumb extended, his clothes soaked through. Something about him seemed wrong. Too still, too calm for someone caught in a storm like this. But Jake had been driving these roads since before I was born, and he'd never left anyone stranded in weather like this. He pulled over, engine idling, and watched as the man approached through the rain. In the glow of the cab lights, Jake could see he was elderly, maybe 70, with wild gray hair and eyes that seemed to reflect the light like an animal's. His clothes were old-fashioned, the kind you'd see in photographs from the 1950s. "Where you headed?" Jake called out as the man climbed into the passenger seat. "Down the road," the old man replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just down the road." Jake shrugged and pulled back onto the highway. The rain was getting worse, turning the asphalt into a river of black water. Visibility was down to maybe 50 feet, and Jake had to fight the steering wheel to keep the truck on the road. "Hell of a storm," Jake said, trying to make conversation. The old man didn't respond, just sat there staring straight ahead. Jake glanced over and noticed something that made his skin crawl. The man's clothes weren't wet. Despite standing in the downpour, he was completely dry. "You okay, partner?" Jake asked. The old man turned to look at him then, and Jake saw something in those eyes that made him want to slam on the brakes and jump out of the cab. They were wrong somehow, too bright, too knowing. "You need to turn around," the old man said quietly. "Right now. Don't go any further down this road." Jake laughed nervously. "Can't do that, friend. Got a delivery to make in Spokane by morning." "Then you'll die tonight," the old man said matter-of-factly. "Just like the others." "What others?" Jake asked. But when he looked over, the passenger seat was empty. The old man had vanished as completely as if he'd never been there at all. Jake pulled over again, his hands shaking as he grabbed his flashlight and climbed down from the cab. The rain had stopped as suddenly as it had started, and the silence was deafening. He walked around the truck, checking every inch, but there was no sign of the hitchhiker. The passenger door was still locked from the inside. "What the hell?" Jake muttered, climbing back into the cab. He sat there for a long moment, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Hallucinations, maybe. He'd been driving for 14 hours straight. and fatigue could play tricks on your mind. But as he put the truck in gear and started down the highway again, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The old man's words echoed in his head, just like the others. 5 miles down the road, Jake saw the first wreck. It was a sedan wrapped around a pine tree about 50 feet from the highway. The car was mangled beyond recognition, and Jake could see that it had been there for a while. Rust had started to eat through the metal, and weeds grew up through the broken windows. But something about the scene bothered him. The car looked like it had been going incredibly fast when it hit, but this section of highway had a speed limit of 45 due to the winding curves. Jake kept driving, but his unease grew with each mile. More wrecks appeared in his headlights, cars that had clearly been there for years, scattered through the forest like discarded toys. Some were burned-out shells. Others were twisted masses of metal that barely resembled vehicles. All of them looked like they'd been going way too fast when they crashed. The CB radio crackled to life, making Jake jump. "Breaker 19, this is Moondog. Any drivers out there on Highway 49? Jake grabbed the mic. "This is Big Jake, eastbound on 49. You got your ears on, Moondog?" "Jake, you need to get off that road right now. There's something wrong with that stretch of highway." "What are you talking about?" "I've been monitoring the emergency channels. They've had 17 accidents on Highway 49 in the past month. All single vehicle crashes, all drivers going way over the speed limit. But here's the thing, Jake. Every single one of those drivers was found with their foot pressed to the floor, pedal to the metal, like they couldn't stop." Jake's blood ran cold. "That's impossible." "That's what I thought too, until I talked to one of the survivors. Guy named Peterson, drives for Consolidated Freight. He said he was driving that stretch when something took control of his truck. Said he couldn't lift his foot off the accelerator, couldn't turn the wheel. Only reason he survived was because he managed to throw himself out of the cab before the truck went over a cliff." "Jesus Christ," Jake whispered. "There's more. The locals have been talking about it for decades. They call it the speed trap. Drivers get on that road and something makes them go faster and faster until they crash. The state keeps trying to shut down that section of highway, but it always gets reopened somehow." Jake looked at his speedometer and felt his stomach drop. He was doing 70 in a 45 zone, and he didn't remember accelerating. His foot was pressed firmly against the gas pedal, and when he tried to lift it, his leg wouldn't respond. "Moondog, I got a problem here," Jake said into the CB, his voice tight with fear. "I can't slow down." "Get off the road, Jake. Pull over." "I can't." Jake fought with the steering wheel, but it was like trying to turn a mountain. The truck stayed locked on course, racing through the darkness at an ever-increasing speed. The speedometer climbed past 80, then 90. In the passenger seat, the old man reappeared. "I tried to warn you," he said sadly, "but nobody ever listens." "What's happening to me?" Jake gasped, still fighting for control of his truck. "This road is hungry," the old man explained. "It feeds on speed, on the terror of drivers who can't stop. Every crash makes it stronger. Every death gives it more power." The speedometer hit 100. Jake could see a sharp curve ahead, and he knew he'd never make it at this speed. The truck would roll, or slam into the trees, or plunge off the mountainside, just like all the others. "How do I stop it?" Jake shouted. The old man smiled sadly. "You don't. But maybe you can warn the next one." Jake understood then. The old man was one of the victims, trapped forever on this stretch of highway, trying to save others from the same fate. He'd been trying to warn drivers for decades, but nobody ever listened. The curve was coming up fast now, and Jake could see the guardrail that would do nothing to stop an 18-wheeler going 110 miles per hour. He was going to die, and there was nothing he could do about it. But then Jake had an idea. If he was going to crash anyway, maybe he could take the road with him. He'd been hauling a load of industrial chemicals, highly flammable stuff that he wasn't supposed to think about too hard. If he could time it right, maybe he could damage the road enough to close it permanently. "Sorry, partner," Jake said to the old man, "but I'm not going quietly." Jake yanked the wheel hard to the right, sending the truck careening off the highway and into the trees. The impact was tremendous, and Jake felt his ribs crack as he was thrown against the door. The trailer jackknifed, then rolled, and Jake heard the sound of metal tearing and chemicals spilling. The explosion lit up the night sky like a miniature sun. Jake was thrown clear of the wreckage, landing hard in a pile of pine needles. When he looked back, he saw a crater where the highway had been. The asphalt melted and twisted into impossible shapes. The old man stood at the edge of the crater, looking down at the destruction. "That might do it," he said quietly, "at least for a while." Jake survived, though he spent 3 months in the hospital recovering from his injuries. The state closed Highway 49 permanently after the accident, claiming the road was too damaged to repair. They rerouted traffic to a different highway, one that went around the cursed stretch of asphalt. But Jake still has nightmares about that night. He dreams of the old man standing by the roadside in the rain, trying to warn drivers who won't listen. And sometimes on the darkest nights, he wonders if the road is really gone, or if it's just waiting for someone to rebuild it. Because hungry things never really die. They just go to sleep, waiting for their next meal. Jake doesn't drive the long hauls anymore. He stays close to home, sticks to highways he knows are safe. But he still monitors the CB radio, listening for drivers who might be in trouble. And sometimes, when conditions are just right, he hears something that makes his blood run cold. A voice on the radio crackling with static. Breaker 19, this is requesting assistance. I'm on Highway 49 and I can't slow down. Repeat, I cannot slow down. Can anyone hear me? Jake always tries to respond, but the voice fades away before he can establish contact. And he knows that somewhere out there, on a road that shouldn't exist, another driver is about to learn that some warnings come too late. The highway remembers. It always remembers, and sooner or later, it always finds a way to feed again. That's the story my Uncle Jake told me, and I believed every word. Until last month, when I was driving through Montana on my way to Seattle. GPS took me down a back road I'd never seen before, Highway 49. The funny thing is, according to the state records, that highway was permanently closed 20 years ago. But there it was, freshly paved and perfectly maintained. And standing on the shoulder, thumb extended, was an old man in clothes from the 1950s. I didn't stop. I floored it and got off that road as fast as I could. When I looked back in my rearview mirror, the old man was gone. But I could have sworn I saw him shake his head like he was disappointed in me, like he knew I was just another driver who wouldn't listen to the warning. The road is still out there, waiting. And someday, someone's going to be desperate enough, or tired enough, or lost enough to take it. When they do, they'll see the old man standing in their headlights, and they'll have a choice to make. I just hope they're smarter than I was. I hope they listen to the warning, because the highway is always hungry, and it's always looking for its next meal. The call came in at 2:47 a.m. on a bitter February night. A trucker named Dale Morrison had contacted dispatch claiming he'd witnessed something impossible on the highway. His voice was shaking so badly the operator could barely understand him. "There's a family," Morrison kept repeating. "A whole family walking on the interstate. Kids and everything. They're gonna get hit." Detective Santos was on duty that night, working the graveyard shift that most cops dreaded. She'd been investigating a string of accidents on Interstate 84, all involving drivers who claimed to have swerved to avoid pedestrians that weren't there when emergency crews arrived. She drove out to meet Morrison at the Blackwater Rest Area, a lonely truck stop about 50 miles east of Portland. The trucker was waiting in the parking lot, chain-smoking cigarettes with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. "Detective, I've been driving these roads for 23 years, Morrison said as Santos approached. "I've seen everything. Drunk drivers, drug runners, people having breakdowns. But I ain't never seen anything like this." Santos pulled out her notebook. "Tell me exactly what you saw." "I was coming up on exit 97, the one that goes to Blackwater Township. You know the one. It's been closed for years ever since the town flooded. Anyway, I'm doing about 60 when I see them in my headlights. A whole family walking down the middle of the highway. Man, woman, 2 little kids. They were soaking wet, like they'd been walking in the rain for hours." Santos knew the area well. Blackwater Township had been evacuated in 1987 after the dam burst, flooding the entire valley. The exit ramp had been closed ever since, barricaded with concrete barriers and warning signs. "What did you do?" Santos asked. "I hit the brakes, pulled over to help them. But when I climbed down from the cab, they were gone, just vanished. But here's the thing, Detective. They left footprints. Wet footprints on the dry asphalt. 2 adults, 2 children, all barefoot." Santos examined the highway with her flashlight. Sure enough, there were watermarks on the pavement, arranged in the pattern of footprints. But that wasn't the strangest part. The footprints led directly to the barricaded exit ramp, then disappeared at the concrete barrier. "Morrison, I need you to think carefully. Did you see their faces?" The trucker shuddered. "That's the thing that's been eating at me." The man looked familiar, like I'd seen him before. And the woman was carrying something looked like a baby, wrapped in a blanket. But when my headlights hit them, they all turned to look at me at the same time. And their eyes... He trailed off, unable to finish. "What about their eyes?" "They were black, not brown or dark blue, completely black. Like looking into deep water." Santos had Morrison write out a formal statement, then drove him home. But she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story. The next morning, she decided to investigate the Blackwater exit more thoroughly. The concrete barriers were covered in graffiti and rust stains, but they'd been there for over 30 years. Beyond them, the access road disappeared into a tangle of overgrown vegetation. Santos had to climb over the barrier to continue her investigation. The old road was barely visible beneath the weeds and debris. Santos followed it downhill toward where Blackwater Township used to be. The forest pressed in on both sides, and she could hear the sound of water somewhere in the distance. After about a mile, she reached the shore of Blackwater Lake. The township was still down there, somewhere under 40 feet of dark water. On clear days, divers said you could see the rooftops of houses, the spire of the old church, and even cars still parked in driveways. Santos was about to head back when she noticed something odd. Fresh tire tracks in the mud by the water's edge. They led right to the shore, as if a car had been driven directly into the lake. She called for backup and a dive team, but the search turned up nothing. The tracks were too degraded to determine what kind of vehicle had made them, and the lake was too murky to see more than a few feet down. That night, Santos received another call. This time it was from a woman named Jessica Chen, who'd been driving home from a late shift at the hospital. "I almost hit them," Chen said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A family walking on the highway. I swerved so hard I nearly went into the guardrail, but when I looked back, they were gone." "Where did this happen?" Santos asked. "Right near the Blackwater exit. And detective, there's something else. The woman in the family, she looked exactly like my sister. My sister who died in a car accident 10 years ago." Santos felt a chill run down her spine. What was she wearing? A blue dress. The same blue dress she was buried in. Over the next week, Santos received 6 more reports of the phantom family. Each witness described the same thing: a man, woman, and 2 children walking on the interstate near the Blackwater exit. But each witness also claimed the family members looked like people they'd known who had died. Santos decided to stake out the area herself. She parked her patrol car in the rest area and waited, watching the highway through binoculars. For 3 nights, nothing happened. But on the 4th night, she saw them. They appeared around midnight, materializing out of the darkness like figures stepping through a doorway. A man in a soaked business suit, a woman in a tattered wedding dress, and 2 children in pajamas. They walked in single file down the center of the highway, moving with an odd, fluid gait that didn't quite look human. Santos grabbed her radio, but when she tried to call for backup, she heard only static. Her car wouldn't start either. The engine turned over but wouldn't catch. She was trapped in the rest area, forced to watch as the family continued their ghostly procession. That's when she recognized them. The man was Thomas Garrett, a local businessman who'd driven off the Blackwater exit in 1987, the night before the evacuation. His car had been found in the lake, but his body was never recovered. The woman was Sarah Marsh, who'd been trying to rescue her children when the dam burst. She'd loaded them into her car and tried to drive to safety, but the flood caught them on the access road. The children, Tommy, age 8, and Lisa, age 6, had been found in their pajamas, still strapped into their car seats 40 feet underwater. Santos watched in horror as the family reached the barricaded exit. They didn't climb over the concrete barriers. They walked through them, their bodies becoming translucent as they passed through the solid concrete. Then they disappeared down the access road toward the lake that had claimed their lives. The next morning, Santos filed her report, but when she tried to submit it, she was told that the Blackwater exit didn't exist. According to the official records, exit 97 had never been built. The highway went straight from exit 96 to exit 98, with no exit in between. Santos drove back to the location, but the concrete barriers were gone. The access road was gone. Even the mile markers had been changed. Where exit 97 should have been, there was only unbroken guardrail and a steep embankment leading down to the forest. But that night, she received another call. A trucker named Williams claimed he'd seen a family walking on the highway near mile marker 97. He'd swerved to avoid them and jackknifed his trailer. "The weird thing is," Williams said, "I could have sworn the woman looked like my mother. She died 5 years ago, but I'd recognize her anywhere." Santos realized what was happening. The family wasn't just walking the highway. They were trying to lead people to join them. Every driver who saw them recognized someone they'd lost, someone they missed desperately. The temptation to follow them, to be reunited with the dead, was overwhelming. She started monitoring the emergency frequencies, listening for reports of accidents near the Phantom exit. Over the next month, she counted 12 crashes in that area, all single-vehicle accidents, all involving drivers who claimed they'd swerved to avoid pedestrians. But Santos noticed a pattern. The drivers who survived were the ones who resisted the urge to follow the family. The ones who didn't make it were found with their cars in the lake, drowned in 40 feet of dark water. Santos tried to warn other officers, but nobody believed her. The official position was that the accidents were caused by driver fatigue and poor road conditions. The Phantom family was just a shared hallucination, a psychological phenomenon that occasionally affected long-distance drivers. But Santos knew better. She'd seen them with her own eyes, and she'd felt the pull of their presence. If she hadn't recognized them for what they were, she might have followed them down that Phantom exit ramp down to the drowned town of Blackwater. The last report Santos received was from a state highway worker named Rodriguez. He'd been driving home from a late shift when he saw the family walking near mile marker 97. "The man looked like my father," Rodriguez said. "He died when I was 12, but I'd know him anywhere. He was wearing the same suit he was buried in." Rodriguez didn't survive the encounter. His car was found at the bottom of Blackwater Lake, in what used to be the town square. The windows were rolled down, and Rodriguez was still strapped in his seat, his eyes wide open, staring up at the surface 40 feet above. Santos retired from the force 6 months later. She couldn't handle the guilt of knowing what was happening and being unable to stop it. But she still monitors the emergency frequencies, listening for reports of accidents near mile marker 97. Because the family is still out there, still walking the highway on dark nights. They're looking for people to join them. People who miss the dead so much they're willing to follow them into the depths of Blackwater Lake. The exit doesn't appear on any map, and the state denies it ever existed. But if you're driving Interstate 84 on a dark night and you see a family walking on the highway near mile marker 97, don't stop. Don't try to help them. And whatever you do, don't follow them down that phantom exit ramp, because some roads lead to places you can never return from, and some families are better left in the past, no matter how much you miss them. The lake remembers everyone who's ever drowned in its depths, and it's always hungry for more. Detective Santos asked me to share this story because she believes people have the right to know what they might encounter on that stretch of highway. She's moved to Arizona now, but she still has nightmares about the Blackwater exit. And sometimes, on the darkest nights, she swears she can still hear the sound of water lapping against the shore of a lake that shouldn't exist. If you ever find yourself on Interstate 84 east of Portland, pay attention to the mile markers. If you see exit 97, keep driving. Don't stop, don't look back, and don't listen to the voices calling your name from the darkness, because the dead don't rest easy in Blackwater Lake, and they're always looking for company.